Hello everybody, and welcome back to Adobe Photoshop Tips and Tricks with Mary NJ08. Episode 2. Last week we covered how to perform an action, and I told you that I'm going to keep these tutorials and tips solely based on my daily workflow. And I will venture off once in a while and ask questions if somebody wants to know how to perform something, and even if it's something that I don't usually use daily in a workflow, I still will cover it if enough people ask. And if I feel it's something that I just want to discuss and go over with everybody, especially if it's something different and unique. We have something a little bit different this week. If you look here on the screen, I have a picture of a waterfall that I took at Bushkill Falls. So here's what happens. If you ever see the snapshots of waterfalls, they pretty much all look the same. They're like this. They're frozen. The water is frozen because when your camera is on automatic, it uses a faster shutter speed, especially so that the image isn't blown out and overexposed. But what about these images that you see, professional images of the water almost looks like it's oozing out? It has a very smooth flowing feel to it. The water is almost like a silk. And if you notice, the shutter speeds are extremely slow. Well, what is the problem with achieving that, shooting an image like that manually to get that exposure? The problem is usually during the time of day that you shoot the waterfall, it's going to be light out. So here's what happens. A little bit of photography 101. When you're shooting a waterfall during the day and you're going to use those very long exposures, okay, you're going to have your camera on your tripod, you're going to have a remote release or whatever, you're going to be shooting at shutter speeds that are so slow. What's going to happen is that's going to let a lot of light in. So you're going to get your water to look like silk, that smooth effect, but what's going to happen is the image is going to be overexposed. It's going to be completely blown out. You're not even going to be able to see the image. So what happens? What do? Shoot the waterfalls at night? Well, there's two things. Now let's talk about the photography aspect of it instead of the post-processing aspect that I'm going to talk about today. To do it right in camera, what you could use is something called a neutral density filter. Now basically what that does is it's almost like sunglasses for your camera lens. So what happens is when you use those real slow shutter speeds to get that dreamy water effect, it's not going to be over-processed. It's not going to be blown out or overexposed because your camera is going to be a couple stops under because of the neutral density filter, which will allow you to shoot at long exposure speeds during the day without having your picture blown out and overexposed. So that's called a neutral density filter. I use them to get it right in camera. They're very good. They have like a 6th stop, a 9th stop, depending on what time of day you're shooting, and also how long your exposure is going to be. So it actually doesn't affect it. You would think, well, wait a minute. Now, by putting a neutral density filter on my image, on my camera, it's going to make the image dark. But because you're shooting during the day and you're using such a long exposure, your image, it'll actually balance it. So it won't be overexposed or underexposed. With the neutral density filter, it's going to be just right. Okay? Now if you were shooting normally in the day with a neutral density filter, then yes, your image will probably be underexposed. But because you're using such a long shutter speed, see, you're using shutter speed for a motion effect, but you're also getting the exposure effect because, let's face it, using long shutter speeds is exposing a lot of light into your camera, into your lens. So you are going to get a way overexposed image. It's not going to look right. It's going to look terrible. Okay, so that's how to get it right in camera. Now, what if you don't have a neutral density filter? What if you're in a pinch, or you see this waterfall and you don't have any of your camera gear on you, or you just basically don't have a neutral density filter? Okay, they're usually relatively inexpensive, but let's just say for whatever reason you don't have one. Here's a workaround. Let's do some post-processing. So you take your image like you normally would, automatic, with a regular camera, and you take it so that the water freezes like you normally would see a snapshot, like this image here, nothing dramatic, and it comes perfectly. It's perfectly exposed because you're not using a long shutter speed. You're using the automatic mode in your camera, and it's freezing the image, so it's not letting a lot of light in. But now you bring the image home, and now you want it to look like that. You didn't have the neutral density filter. You want the long exposure. Okay? How do we get that dreamy effect on the image now? I'm going to show you how to do it in Photoshop with post-processing. So get your image that you took, get your vacation image, get your travel shot that you took. You're not happy with it. It doesn't have that dreamy effect. You didn't have the neutral density filter. You try taking it and your image is way overexposed. Ugh. I'm going to show you a workaround. So I took this shot on purpose for this demo, and I shot it in automatic, and I froze the water. Nothing really, fancy. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually get this water to have that dreamy effect. Okay, so what we're going to basically do is we have our background layer here. Okay, so we're going to do Command or Control J. Basically what that does is that duplicates the layer, so you're not going to corrupt your original image. Okay, you're going to get a brand new layer. You'll see why, because later on we're going to start doing some masking on selected parts of the image, and we still need our original base image. So that's why I kept the background and I duplicated it. So all our editing and masking is going to go on this new layer here, and you can actually label it. You're going to label it, and we're going to say water effect. Okay, or whatever you want to use, whatever name. So you have your background and you have your water effect. Okay, so all our editing is going to go on the water effect layer, leaving your original image intact, non-constructively, as I like to call it. Okay, so now we have our new layer, water effect. So what are we going to do now? Well, we're going to go to Filter. Okay, we're going to go to Blur, and we're going to go to Motion Blur. Now here's what happens. Your motion blur angle by default is set to 0, so basically it's going to go left and right with the motion blur, but you want it to go in the angle of your waterfall. So in this case we're going to say relatively 90 degrees, straight vertical, up and down. So your motion flow is going to go vertical, up and down 90 degrees. You want that. Now what about the effect of the motion blur? You can move the preview slider here and take a good look at what you're blurring. So now what we're going to do is we're going to do the distance in pixels. Now I'm going to be honest with you, I normally wouldn't put this high a number in, but for the purposes of this video, so it's able to be shown on YouTube once the video is rendered or downgraded or whatever, I want to be a little bit more precise with the render here. So I'm actually going to up the pixels to 133. But normally I wouldn't use anything that dramatic because you also don't want it to look fake either. But for the purposes of this video, we're going to do 133 pixels so you can see what we're doing here. And then we're going to hit OK. Now look what happens now. We're doing this effect globally, so the entire image is affected. We don't want that though. Well, hence is why we made it on a new layer with our original background layer intact. What does that mean? That means we're going to mask this top layer, the water effect layer. So we're going to hold Alt Option, and we are going to click the mask button. Oh, wait a minute now. It's there, it's masked on the top layer, but the motion effect is gone now because it's working off that underlayer, the original untouched image, the deconstruction layer. But wait a minute now. I lost my motion blur. So what was the sense? Well, it's still there. Notice that it's masked. So here's a little trick. How to bring back an effect in a mask. Well, what we're going to do is we're going to use a brush. We're We're going to use a fairly decent sized brush. So we're going to hit the bracket keys, the right bracket key. As you can see, my cursor brush is getting bigger, smaller, bigger. We're going to use a brush about that big. As we paint, depending on what areas we're painting in, we can make the brush bigger or smaller to get in-depth detail and effectiveness. So we're going to keep it about right there for now. And what we're going to do is we're going to paint that motion blur back in with the layer mask. So instead of it being globally, we're going to now do selective masking. Now, what color would I mask in? Well, take a look at the mask. It's black. So what do you think would show up in a black mask? White. So we're going to switch our color to white for our foreground. We are going to paint in white. Now watch what happens. Aha, look at that. It's only using the motion blur to the parts we're painting back in. So now we can selectively paint this image with the motion blur without affecting the rest of it. So we're going to get into a little, I'm going to try to do this fairly quick without going crazy, but you could definitely spend a very long time on this to be precise. But for the purposes of this video, I'm going to try to speed it up. But I'm just going to start painting this back in. This is where a pen tablet also comes in very handy, like a Wacom bamboo tablet. You can really get precise in there. And like I said, you know, if you don't like the settings for the motion blur, you could definitely change them. You could increase them, you could decrease them if it looks a little fake. But this is definitely a workaround if you can't get it right in camera and you don't have a neutral density filter and you have Photoshop. You know, one of the perks of doing post-processing. I know a lot of photographers swear by doing it right in camera, but you know, there's going to be times where sometimes you can't. Alright, so I'm going to futz with this. Alright, look at that. We actually added in the motion blur. And it looks like we did it right in camera. Now I'm going to actually switch the layer mask off so you can see what we did. I'm going to switch it on and off. Okay, there it is off as we taken it with the camera. And there's with the filter. And notice the rest of the image is untouched. On, off, on. Okay, and that is how to do selective masking with a motion blur on a waterfall. And you don't just have to use it on waterfalls, you could use this on many images. Okay, I just like to use it on waterfalls because I find it to be, you know, natural looking. It's pretty good. And so, you know, hey, sometimes I've been there in situations where, oops, I don't have my neutral density filter. I'm in front of this awesome waterfall, or I didn't expect to run into a waterfall. Now what do I do? It's during the day. You know, if I shoot it with a slow shutter speed, that image is going to be way overblown and overexposed. Bring it home, do this little motion blur effect, and we're done. Okay? So thanks for joining us. Until next time, we'll see you later.